Well, here during State of Excellence Week with four distinguished members of the Penn State brand across the board, we have Carl Ohlson, who is the assistant AD for performance psychology, head coach Sarah Brown, the head coach of the women's gymnastics squad, Allison Schlegel, who is a redshirt sophomore with the Penn State women's soccer program, and then, of course, Coach Cooper, head coach Rob Cooper for the Penn State baseball team. Guys, first off, I appreciate you taking the time to join us during State of the Excellence Week. But the reason that we wanted to get you together was to talk about cultural leadership. And during 2020, I think that is probably more prominent than ever across the board, whether it's in life or whether it's in sports. So, Carl, I'm going to start with you and ask you, what is the definition of leadership?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Hit me with a hard one out front. For me, I look at leadership as influence. So it's the ability to influence people to go where they may not go on their own.
All right, Alice, so you being the only student athlete on this little Zoom roundtable panel as we have to do in 2020, I want to know from your perspective, what makes a good leader within a program?
Oh, geez. Yeah, it's been quite the year, hasn't it? I would say empathy. I think that empathy is what has gotten like our team so far during this time. I think, everybody is fighting their own battles right now. And if you can't really get on the same page as everyone on your team, you're not going to get anywhere. So, I think just from taking every individual and looking at their own stories and what they've been going through this entire time, like that's when you can get the buy-in, because when people really feel like they're cared about and they really know that, you're with them and you get them and you understand them, it's easier to buy into something that you all care about. So I would definitely, say empathy has been that big thing for us.
Carl, I love that word that Allie just used right there, empathy, because I think it describes what everybody is going through right now. And another word that kind of ties off of that in some sense is adversity. That's on the complete flip side of that. So when it comes to adversity, how do you believe that Penn State has really embraced that during 2020?
No, that's a really great topic for us to explore here, because one of the things that I think we've done extraordinarily well is embrace adversity as opportunity. Like, so if we look at the adaptation process, whether we're going to stress a muscle through a lift or stress the lungs through a run or just stress the mind through different experiences, we're built for adaptation. We're going to adjust and get stronger as we go through this if we want to. And so by looking at each moment of adversity as an opportunity to get better, it doesn't mean you enjoy it. Like I think Schlegel can comment on this, but if you get to take the beep test, pretty much you're not jumping up and down for joy that you get to take the beep test, but you also know that as you go through this process, you're going to get stronger, fitter, faster, whatever. So you're going to be able to adjust, adapt, and become a better version of yourself. And frankly, we don't really do that well through times when everything's really easy.
I think, Mitch, also, a lot of this also is just a test of, obviously it's not anything that any of us want. It's not how any of these student athletes like Allie and any of our, the kids on our campus scripted out how college and their seasons and their careers would be. But if you can step away for a second, you can also look at it as a test as to, again, what can I look at? What can I focus on? What kind of good can I get out of this? And that's not easy. To make it sound like you can just step out and do that, I don't mean it. It's like that easy. But what you have to really make yourself do is put the energy into things that are going to, one, make you better, two, make your team better, that you can grow from. And as we talk about, athletes talk about it, coaches talk about it, Carl talks about it consistently. The only way you are going to grow and become better and learn is through adversity. So you have to embrace that part of it. And, I'm really curious to see some of the things that come out of this in the next couple of years when you hear about people that have really come up with unbelievable ideas, or have really, grown in their sport, or have figured out new businesses just because they were forced to deal with it this way. And the last part is coaches that I tell our guys all the time is, look, if you say you want to be great at this thing, there is going to come a point in time where we get to go back to some semblance of normal, and we will play another team. And when we do, they're not going to care what we had to deal with. They're going to want to beat us, and we got to be ready to go. So, it's going to be a lot of fun to see the growth that takes place, that everybody gets to see here in a few years.
Coach Brown, you're shaking your head in agreement with what Coach Cooper was just saying. Why?
I was thinking a lot about the word adversity. And I think right now, one of the biggest challenges that we're facing is the unknown. And when you get a group of people like us together, really highly skilled and trained coaches and student athletes, there's not a lot that we don't know about our sport. There's not a lot that we don't know about our season. There's not a lot we don't know about our opponent or about our own athletes as a coach. And I would say that that's actually one of the big adversarial things that we've tried to overcome as a program is we talk about, embracing. Carl says this often, you kind of have to embrace the suck at some point, like the beep test, like you just embrace it. It's going to be hard, but you're going to power through it. I think when you can prepare for that type of adversity, you have yourself some type of an advantage. I think what caught us all off guard this time around was we had no preparation for this. Nobody knew what we were going into. And as we've watched over the last 8 months, as this whole year has evolved, it kind of feels like sometimes it's challenge after challenge after challenge. And when you come up with an answer, there's 28 more questions or things that are lingering because we don't know, and we don't know what we don't know. I will say that I think if we knew then what we know now, obviously about this virus, and obviously we would have been able to change the way we went through things potentially and done things differently. But one of the things that I would not have changed with our team is how it's brought us together. I was just going to say Coop super informally, and I was like, Coach Cooper. So I'm just going to be informal. Coop over here is like, we didn't know what we didn't know. And we're talking about how our team has come together and we have this new normal. And here we are on Zoom, right? Like this is our new normal. How comfortable are we all now with Zoom? I'm actually meeting with people more often now. I was seeing people daily and maybe not having this many conversations. And now you just set it and you put it on your calendar, and we're going to have a Zoom meeting every single week. And so for us, I do feel lucky. I do feel grateful. I do feel like this has been really, really hard and harder for some. And my heart goes out to the families that were directly affected, obviously, by the pandemic. But at the same time, I know that my family, my athletic family, has actually come together in a lot of ways. And I'm starting to see and build relationships even stronger than I was kind of pre-COVID. And I look forward and think there will always be life before the pandemic and life after the pandemic. And I think we will all be forever changed. But I am forever optimist. And so I think that we're going to be changed for the better in a lot of ways. And we've learned a lot about ourselves and a lot about each other through this process.
Allie, from your standpoint, so we've talked about 2020 and what COVID challenges have presented all of us, but away from sports, when somebody looks up to you, whether that's a future soccer stud that's on the field right now practicing, or whether that's somebody that you look up to, when it comes to those leadership aspects and the opportunity that we have all taken now because of 2020, what are some of those attributes that you look for, whether it's the future star or the person that you look up to?
Great question. I don't want to drag this answer too much, but I kind of have to. So basically, we had to read Chop Wood, Carry Water before this coming season. You're all shaking your heads. Best book. It's great. And there's a story about this architect who's like a baller. He's the best architect ever, but he's kind of at the end of his career and he wants to be done. But his company's like, hey, please build us one last house. And then you can retire, no biggie. And he's like, all right, whatever, I'll do it. But he doesn't do it as well as he usually does it. He's not as detail oriented. He kind of flies through it, doesn't plan as well as he usually does. He finally gets done. He goes and he's like, hey, all right, I'm done. I'm out of here. And his company hands him the keys and is like, oh, well, it's your house. And he's like, my house? I just didn't do anything for this house. Like I didn't do as good of a job as I should have if I knew it was my house. And so that's kind of been our team's theme throughout this whole thing, is that you're building your own house this whole time. Yeah, we can't play games. We're not playing other teams. So you have to build your own house, and you have to be aware of that. So I think through this whole time, as I look at the people that I look up to on my own team and little guys, is like, there's no finish line. I think people want things to be over, or they want to get to this point or get to this achievement. Like, I think through this whole thing, it's just learning that there's no finish line. So the attribute that I would look for the most is just the growth mindset. Like, just grow. Like, how can we get better? How can we grow? How can we move forward? Because having once I get to college, if it's a young person, once I get that scholarship, or, once we win a national championship, once I go pro, I think that's a mindset that's, not going to take you far. It's going to take you short, because you're going to get there and you're going to be like, okay, well, now what? I did the thing and now I don't know what to do with myself. So I would say growth mindset is my answer to that one.
With the growth mindset, just being around Penn State for a couple of years now, I've heard the term get 1% better every day, right? So whether that's you're 1% better in the classroom, whether that's 1% on the field, whether that's 1% in training, I think that's such a fascinating concept. And I know that all of you guys around this athletics department have embraced that. So Coach Cooper, when it comes to getting 1% better every day, whether it's in athletics or your job, how do you do that?
Well, I think, first of all, you have to Allie hit it on the head. You have to have that mindset to start with, that, again, what am I going to put my energy into? Like, where am I going to direct my focus? And so you got to make the choice. And, I think the other thing too is we try to talk to our guys a lot about redefining what adversity and failure really is, meaning, so many people want that fast forward button, or they want that magic recipe to become great. And the truth is the only way that you're going to become great or learn or grow or get better is you got to be willing to go out and fail. And when you realize that that's not something to be avoided, it's actually necessary, then you're able to put yourself in a position to grow and to get better and learn. And, I tell guys all the time, look, like in the game of baseball, when you quote unquote fail in the game's talking to you. It's trying to teach you how to become better at it. And so are you going to, take some time to listen to it? It doesn't mean you're happy about it. It doesn't mean you are like, sweet, I struck out here with the bases loaded. You're trying to learn to grow to become a better baseball player. And then it's the same when you're not on the field, when something's really hard in the classroom. Like, again, it may not be fun, but it is talking to you at that moment and saying, okay, the way you're going about this right now is not going to allow you to take another step. And I think the other part of it too is the term 1% better. It just means at the end of the day, did you learn something? Did you grow? Because I think people forget this, that, you can fail or get knocked down or you can lose a game. And, that doesn't mean you didn't get better that day. Like sometimes you got to take a step backward and you got to get knocked down, to really make that day count, So I think it's just again, I think Allie said it perfect. I think it's how you view it. I think it's what you choose to put energy into. And then are you seeking out those uncomfortable situations to learn and grow from?
I'll also add to that. I think that sometimes in order to get better, you actually have to take a step back and show yourself a little bit of grace as well. We talk a lot about this in gymnastics, that you might get better, but you also might get worse. Sometimes more is Dr. Ohlson says this all the time, right? Like, more is not better. It's just more. So if today is not your day, sometimes in order to get better mentally, you need to take a step back. And I think more now than ever, I feel like during this time, and we all need to have that opportunity to just step away for a moment and realize that in that time that you're taking for yourself, in that grace that you're showing yourself, in that empathy that you're providing yourself, you are growing and you are getting better. And I can't reiterate what Coop said enough. I feel like We learn from everything that we do. I mean, my athletes tumble on a 4-inch beam, 4 feet above the air. Like, do you think they stay on all the time? I mean, they can't, right? And so sometimes we have athletes that will fall, and you actually will hear the coaches say, like, that's a really good mistake. Really good job. Like, you overcorrected, you've been falling to the right, but you fell to the left that time. Did it feel different? And they're like, yeah, but I still fell. And you're like, yeah, but we learned from it, and I grew up in a program that would say good fall. Like, that is a thing. That is a good fall. That is really good, because we have to learn. And I think too often our athletes are put on this stage, and perfection is expected in games, right? Perfection is expected under pressure. But that doesn't just happen overnight. That happens through a series of mistakes in practice that we learn from every single day. And so I feel really strongly about the fact that more is not always better. I feel strongly that taking a step back makes you better. And I absolutely agree with everyone that at any given moment, we can be learning and getting better, even though on the outside and the standards that are set around us may not appear that way. The growth that's happening inside of you is always incredible when you have those moments, and you're supported with people around you that recognize the process you're going through.
Mitch, I'd like to jump in on that for a second too, just because so much of what you just heard is what we would call a mastery mindset, right? It's not a destination mindset. It's pursuing mastery, which you're never done getting better until you decide I'm done, right? And so part of that 1% better is absolutely, are we advancing some aspect of what we do every day? And it might be just how we filter or assess a performance, right? It also might be, are we really dedicated to being intentional? And are we dedicated to intentionally defining what success means for a particular practice, for a particular game? Like, you can define successes in a lot of different ways that don't show up in the wins and losses. And it doesn't mean you don't care about winning. It means you care so much that you're going to bring your attention back again and again to the controllables, which is your process, which is part of your mastery.
Coach Brown, I want to go back to what you were talking about and the fact that it's a good fall, right? You can learn from that type of situation. And I think a lot of people out there in the world away from sports, well, I didn't give it enough today. I got to try harder tomorrow. I got to show up and do 16 more interviews to be able to be better at my craft, whatever it is for that example. When it comes to that, how do you learn that, okay, I wasn't at my best today, or I wasn't at my best in this specific moment, but I can turn the page and use that to my advantage?
I think it's a really good question. And I think, like, in your example of, say, the interview, right? You've been going through life and you've been interviewing and not getting jobs, but you're saying the same thing over and over again. It may not be that you're not qualified, or it may not even be that you don't have the right tools, but then maybe you're not getting them across clearly enough. And I think when you talk about that, you're talking about self-reflection, and you're talking about an opportunity to kind of look inside, evaluate what you've got going on, what your intention is, and then also figuring out how it's being received. And so we translate that into gymnastics, and that's what I'll talk about because I know that the best in sitting here. But when we will communicate effectively with our athletes, a lot of the things that we'll say is like, how did that feel? And the athlete will say, like, this is a really easy one. Like, the athlete will say, I feel like my body is straight, like it's really straight. And I'm like, but I see you piked, like I see your hips are closed and I see a pike shape. So if you feel straight and I see pike, then I need you to feel arched. I need you to feel really open. And so then they do the next one, and you'll hear the coaches, instantly, like, oh, that was better. Yeah. And she's like, oh, that felt really weird. It felt arched. And we're like, that is your new normal. Like, whatever you just did right there, you're going to redefine that is now straight. And maybe for years you've been thinking that was a straight position, but really it's a little bit too hollow. It's a little bit too piked. And so it's kind of redefining and matching what the expectation on the outside is with what you're feeling on the inside. And I think that goes perfectly with the example we just talked about with interviews. I think that goes in our sport. And especially in a sport like ours, where most of it is completely subjective, right? It's an opinion of a judge as to whether or not you're graceful, or you jumped high enough, or, you landed softly enough, or whatever the case might be. But there are also parts of our sport that are very objective. Your split leaps need to be 180 degrees. Your handstand needs to be completely vertical. Those are not opinionated things. Those are the very objective. And so for you to be able to redefine how to meet that outside standard and get there in a way that works for you is ultimately, I think, a measure of success. And we haven't talked a ton about success on this call, but I think that if we move into that direction, a lot of times making that connection is a way that I define success for athletes, is when they hit that moment, they have that aha moment, that's success. And we can do that on the small scale or the large scale as well.
I mean, that's like the perfect segue. So might as well go into success right there. Thanks for setting that up for us. Carl, what would you say defines success for a coach?
I think part of success really for anybody, whether you're, a coach, a professor, or an athlete, is did you do what you set out to do? And did you do it how you set out to do it? So before you can figure out if you've been successful, you first have to have a really good sense of what it is that you're actually trying to accomplish. If all you're looking for is wins, and we all want to win, that's great. But if you're fixated on winning and not on the process of winning, then you're probably going to have a lot of stuff to clean up over time, right? But if you recognize that process drives results, and you look at aspects of process that are completely controllable, and then you have ways of assessing what success looks like, whether it's a particular routine or being vertical, as Sarah was just talking about, or whether it's a particular grip or putting the ball in play versus hitting a home run, or whatever it happens to be, being really intentional with the language that you use to describe what it is you're looking for, and making sure that as much as possible the success or failure is tied to something that you have complete control over. Which doesn't say we don't care about outcomes. We absolutely care about outcomes, but the opponent gets a vote in that part. The opponent doesn't get a vote in our process. And so I keep coming back to that. And as for a coach, to be able to clearly articulate what your philosophy is, what your vision is, and what your process is, to the point where the athletes can explain it back accurately and completely, like then you have something that you have a level of coherence that will allow you to, over time, experience more and more of what you define as success.
Allie, how would you define success as a student athlete?
I feel like I should be taking notes right now, guys. You're throwing out some good stuff here. I love what Carl said, and I think for me, it's pretty much on the same spectrum in terms of like, there's definitely a balance between the goals that you have, the national championships, the Big Ten championships, the personal accolades, all of those types of things. I think those are always awesome things to keep in mind. And I think for all of us, that's what drives us to wake up at 5 a.m. and drives us to, do the things that we do. But at the end of the day, if I'm in the national championship and a ref calls a PK when it's not a PK, like I can't be crying for the next 3 years over that and defining, my success in that way. And I think for me, I've never really been a huge goals person. I don't like goals because of what Carl's kind of saying, like how much control do I have over something like winning a national championship? So I like to define success in terms of like what my mission is, what can I do every day, what's in my control. And for me, like that's just being your best. I don't think the words "do your best" really clicked. And Carl saw this in me freshman year, like summer. I'm like 18. I'm like, do your best. Oh, no, like you should actually do your best. And that's the thing. That's it. So, when I think about success and what that actually means, I think it's doing your best and, reaching your personal full potential and getting better every day and that growth again. But I think when you have the big things in mind, that's the drivers that you talk about, the national championships. The success really comes from everything else and all those controllables and just pursuing your best.
I think Allie is spot on there. And the way I'll relate it is with our guys is so if you ask most coaches and you like watch games and stuff and you see athletes and you sit there and you go, so-and-so is a really, really good player. It's usually not, because, well, they're just so ultra talented. That's obviously being talented helps, and it's what kind of gets all of them on campus. But the ones that take it to another level are the ones that give themselves permission to be great. And what I mean by that is that, when I see a player that is close to breaking through, it's because they're holding themselves back, and they're holding themselves back because and it comes from a good place. They want to do really, really well. They don't want to let their teammates down. They don't want to let their families down. Their whole self-worth, unfortunately, might be wrapped up into what kind of athlete they are. And so when you are doing everything you can to not make a mistake and to be perfect and to avoid looking bad or losing or failing, you can't possibly reach another level. You're just playing protection. And once you get to that point where you can say, you know what, like Carl said it nice though. I like Carl's other saying is that the enemy gets a vote. So, when you're playing, when you can go out there, and this is to me, I think exactly what Allie's saying, when you can go out there and you can let it all hang out and leave it out there. And if you come up short, but you didn't cheat yourself, you went after it, you didn't hold back, you didn't try to be perfect. And that to me is success. And that to me is process. Then you're going to put yourself in a position more often to be successful, to win. And what most people do is once they break through, they realize, okay, yeah, you know what? The enemy gets a vote, but my vote's pretty good too. And they end up winning a lot more than because they're not afraid of what happens if they do get beat or they do fail or they do mess up. I think that's to me about, when you kind of give yourself permission to do that, then that's when the growth takes off for that individual athlete.
I'd love to, add on that a little bit because it made me think of something like, I think when you're actually successful, there's kind of a peace within you about the outcome. What he's saying, like you just leave it all out there, you just go for it. I think there's a very divine peace in your heart when you're just like, oh, well, whatever, the outcome, because you just sent it, like you full sent, and that's good. And there's nothing that you held back. There's like a very big happiness, and it's not stressful. You're not, I'm worried. I think success is a very peaceful thing because you're not worried about the outcome, and you're so much more wow, I really did that. I did all these things. I did the hard things. I did the easy things. And now I can just live with what happens because it is what it is.
And the thing that I'm sorry, Sarah, I promise I won't take this over. But the thing that she said about that piece is then you also are in a place that you can actually learn from what went on. That's when you can start grabbing, this is what I did well. This is what I can do better. This is because you weren't holding back at all. So now is when you can really, really learn instead of, if I hold back, really what I'm doing in my mind later is I don't ever want to feel like that again. How can I avoid being in that situation again? So that piece is also when you start getting really greedy as an athlete, because you get to start to learn. So, and now I'm going to let the best coach on here, Sarah, answer that question.
That's not true, but everything you just said is, and I think the word you were looking for, Allie, it's freeing, it's liberating. It's just this no holds barred. I'm out there. This is me giving it everything I have in the sport that I love, doing it with the best friends I have in the world. And I like the physical motion for me is that athlete that Coop was talking about is here, right? They're holding on to everything and they're just trying to survive and get through it. And I think when you get to this moment that you guys are talking about, you physically see the shoulders come down, everything opens up, the face lightens a little bit. And all of a sudden you're living in this super liberating world where anything is possible, right? And all of a sudden life is just lighter and things seem to just kind of fall into place. I'm a big believer in power of the universe, and I think when you're open to what the universe brings to you, all of a sudden you start to be rewarded for that. So I just watching you guys talk about this, all I kept thinking was just about how freeing and liberating that moment is. And that really is success. And that really is an athlete and a coach relationship coming full circle. I think you started this question, Mitch, by asking what does success look like from a coach? And I think coaches have to be like that too. We also have to be open. We also have to let go of expectation. We also have to stop looking over our shoulder about what people might be saying about us or our program or our athletes or what our goals are, and just be truly, genuinely, and authentically ourselves. And for me, coaching is about creating relationships and making connections with student athletes. And I know that everybody on this call believes in that. That is what success is when you can be your most genuine and authentic self as both a coach and also expect that from your athletes, and then have those real connections with one another. That's when the growth starts to happen. And then, like you guys are talking about, right, that's when the tangible things that we all want, like the championships and the W's and all of that, start to come. And I think too often it's assumed that you have to have one or the other. Like you either want to win or you want to have really great relationships. And I think what everybody on this call is saying that is that by having those open, genuine, authentic connections with one another, those relationships, you're setting yourself up for this opportunity to start grabbing, like Coop said, start grabbing that championship, start grabbing this perfection, and start being the best version of yourself, and also as the best version of the team that you can be.
The word that you guys kept mentioning was process. How do you embrace the process to ultimately get to where you want to go?
Oh man, I feel like this is one of those cliches that you just have to accept when you first come to be a college athlete, because everybody, is shoving it down your throat. You're like, I just want to start and play as a freshman. And they're like, no, thanks though. Nice try. I think process has a lot to do with acceptance. And I think acceptance has this kind of negative connotation sometimes about being like complacent. But we talk a lot about how acceptance is like the first step, whatever your role is, let's say on the team, like if you are a bench or you're injured, like my freshman year, I tore my ACL, I was injured, and I kind of, had to accept that I wasn't going to play, and I didn't have as much of an impact like on the field. But I think because of that acceptance initially, that like, all right, well, now I have a busted knee, what can I do? That was what allowed me to begin my process of not only recovery, but being the person I wanted to be on my team, who I wanted to be as a teammate, how I could support my team in the best way possible, being in a brace. So I would say that when we talk about process, we have to talk about acceptance and just then presence. Where are you right now? How can I be where my feet are? And where am I in that process? And then once you're present, then you get the perspective. You have the acceptance, you got the presence, and then you have the perspective afterwards. And those are kind of those 3 steps for me of where the process leads you, because without any of those, I think you're just going to get lost along the way, and you're just going to get caught up in kind of the hamster wheel. But all of those things, kind of add up to the process.
I was just thinking about process being a lot about trust and a lot about patience. You hear people say all the time, like, trust the process, but what does that mean? And I think what it means is, I think it means trusting the people that are setting this process up for you. And so if I were a coach, I would trust administration. I would trust my team. If I were an athlete, I would trust my coach, because they're the ones that are kind of defining this role for me. They're the ones that are defining the environment that I'm in. And so I think you need to trust that the people that are around you are going to help you through that process. And then you have to be patient. And unfortunately, it is called a process. It's going to take time. And we don't really ever know. I don't think we can know how long it's going to take. Again, when I'm using gymnastics analogies, I'm thinking about, skill development. And we have had athletes that learn a skill in a day. And then we have athletes that learn a skill in a year or 3 years or 5 years. And it depends what skills you're talking about. They might be mental skills and they might be physical skills. But you have to be patient with yourself. And one of the things that Allie alluded to as well was, kind of meeting yourself where you are. And that acceptance piece is huge. And I think once you know that, and you can trust the people around you and be patient that they have the best interest at heart for you, and that they're going to guide you in the right direction, then all of a sudden, process starts to unfold, and it starts to build upon itself. And that's what I think leads to culture, right? Now, all of a sudden, all these things are kind of swirling around and you're finding yourself in a really great environment. That's great culture. And I think we have that at Penn State, and I think we have that within our programs. And it's great to hear these words over and over again on all the calls that I'm a part of, because it tells me that our culture within Penn State athletics is not only great, but it's also unified. And we're all marching towards the same goal and going in the same direction, no matter if you play soccer or if you play baseball or you do gymnastics, we're all moving in the same direction.
That was, both of their answers are fantastic. For me, process has a lot to do with just being present in what's going on right here, right now. I tell people all the time, when my two boys were younger, and if you bought them a new video game, I mean, you could shoot a gun off next to them, but if they're just starting off playing that video game, they wouldn't hear it. They're so focused and so locked in on trying to immerse themselves into learning that. And to me, that's process. Process is being able to be present in the moment, whether it's as an athlete doing that lift, as an athlete trying to, execute this routine, or whether it's, in your relationships with your family, or, for me with my wife and my kids, you have to be present in order to get the most out of it, to learn, to improve it, to move forward with it. And then I think the other thing that's really big when we talk about process is it's got to be the way you approach it's got to be authentic to you. I think Sarah is an unbelievable coach, but the way she goes about her defining process and attacking the process, there's probably similarities that we have, but she's got to do it the way that's authentic to her, and I got to do it the way that's authentic to me. Same thing as athletes, and I think, Allie, probably one of the things that you learned as a young student athlete here was, okay, well, gosh, she's really, really good. I got to do it just like her. Well, maybe you can't. And I don't mean that like talent wise. I mean, well, that works for her, and maybe I can learn some stuff from her. And that standard is probably where I need to be. But if I do it that way, then I'm not being the best version of myself. So I think, again, being present and then being your authentic self as you're doing it.
The one thing that I would add to that, and if you blend everything you just heard, that's gold. The word that I would add would be consistency, right? Because when we talk about process, too often it can become a bumper sticker. It's a nice phrase. Everybody uses it. Not everybody understands just how hard that is. So being consistent and relentless with being purposeful and deliberate in controlling what you have control over. That's your mindset coming into practice. That's the way you respond to something going well and something not going well. That's the way you respond to feedback. Like, it's everything. You have choices, and that the hardest part of the consistency and process is you're making choices over and over again throughout the day, throughout a practice, throughout a game. It sounds easy. It's not at all. But if you really are bought into process, you've decided that as a philosophy, you're going to win the next moment over and over and over again by how you act, how you carry yourself, how you speak, how you perform. And yeah, your opponent gets a vote, but they don't get the vote. They get a vote. And your vote is by sticking to what you know how to do and doing it. And the challenge becomes you get distracted by feeling like you have to react to somebody else on the other side. And the reality is you want to dictate the situation to them, not have them dictate the situation to you. And whether that's an opponent or whether that's a judge, doesn't matter. You want to be in control of dictating the situation. And that's something that you have to decide long before you show up. And you have to feed your mind with that in order for it to be consistent.
Wow, that's a lot to consume from the four of you. So if anybody did miss that, be sure to go back and watch this thing over again. And I'm sure you're going to see snippets of it on social media. But I appreciate the four of you sitting down and sharing this wisdom with us. And I know it was just a snippet, but hopefully we'll see you guys back out on the competition surface soon, and we can talk about this more down the road.